Welcome back to Crime Documentary Files. On the evening of September 14th, 2022, in bustling downtown Seoul, Sindang Station was experiencing the evening rush hour, with people hurrying back and forth, when suddenly a piercing emergency alarm bell rang out from the women's restroom at the station. Several passengers and station staff nearby rushed over in panic. When the restroom door opened, the scene inside left everyone stunned. A young woman in a Seoul Metro employee uniform was collapsed on the floor, covered in blood. Right next to her, a strange man was flailing wildly as he was being restrained by two station employees. In that moment of horrifying chaos, a female station employee immediately recognized the victim as her close colleague from the evening patrol shift. The shock of seeing her daily companion lying in a pool of blood nearly caused her to faint, but she maintained enough composure to immediately call for emergency services. Seeing that the victim was still barely breathing, station security, along with several passengers, didn't hesitate to rush in and provide first aid, trying to stop the bleeding while waiting for police and ambulances to arrive. Less than 5 minutes later, local police forces arrived and quickly sealed off the crime scene. The victim was rushed to the hospital immediately afterward, but due to the severity of her wounds and massive blood loss, she took her last breath at the hospital that night. Outside the women's restroom at Sindang Station, the familiar sign reading "Safe Women's Restroom" had now become a haunting reminder for Seoul residents after this shocking tragedy. The word "safe" on the sign seemed like bitter irony in the face of the brutal reality that had just occurred. When forensic teams conducted a meticulous examination of every corner of the crime scene, the picture of the crime gradually became clear through chilling details. This was originally a public restroom located right on the platform of Line 2, one of Seoul's busiest subway lines, normally lit 24/7 and always kept clean. But now, under the cold neon lights still shining on the pristine white tile floor, were dark red bloodstains spreading wide, creating a horrifying scene that made anyone who looked upon it shudder. The blood was most heavily concentrated around a toilet stall with its door wide open, the exact spot where the victim had fallen. Throughout the walls and floor were signs of a violent struggle, with scratches, blood spatter, and desperate handprints on the cold tile surfaces. An internal communication device belonging to the station employee had been thrown into a corner of the room, its casing cracked, showing the terrible violence of the attack. Several safety instruction signs had fallen from their positions, some stained with blood and torn. Nearby, during their meticulous search, police also found a folding knife covered in blood, identified as the primary weapon the perpetrator had used to commit this brutal act before hastily abandoning it after completing the deed. Next to a public trash can, there was a dark black hood and blue rubber gloves also hastily discarded, items showing that the killer had prepared in advance and attempted to conceal his identity. All of these crucial pieces of evidence were carefully collected by the investigative team in specialized sealed bags, prepared to be sent to the forensic laboratory for fingerprint, DNA, and other clue analysis. Through preliminary observation at the crime scene, investigators determined the victim was a young woman under 30 years old, wearing the familiar uniform of Seoul Metro employees. The name tag on her shirt was so blood-stained it was difficult to read, but a colleague quickly confirmed her identity. However, the investigating agency initially kept the victim's personal information confidential from the media. In South Korea, laws typically do not publicly disclose the names and ages of victims in serious criminal cases, so the media and press only referred to her as A. The victim had been brutally attacked with numerous knife wounds concentrated in the chest and abdomen areas. The deep wounds were clearly visible through her torn and blood-soaked uniform. A veteran forensic doctor present at the scene, after conducting a preliminary examination of the victim's condition, stated that the perpetrator had acted with rarely seen brutality, repeatedly stabbing at the most vulnerable locations. The crime scene was a cramped toilet stall where the victim had virtually no opportunity to escape. Although the suspect had been subdued and arrested at the scene, investigators didn't rush to conclusions, but continued to meticulously collect every small clue that could help clarify the motive and sequence of events in the case. They paid particular attention to the red emergency alarm bell mounted on the wall near the entrance. This important safety device had been activated by the victim while being attacked, creating the sharp ringing that drew attention and brought people from outside to the scene in time. The fact that the victim still had enough composure and consciousness to press the alarm button during a life-threatening situation suggested she may have anticipated the danger when encountering her attacker. This important detail led police to hypothesize with good reason that perhaps the killer and victim had known each other previously, and that's why, as soon as she unexpectedly encountered him in the restroom, she tried her best to send out a distress signal. To clarify these crucial suspicions, police immediately focused all resources on investigating and clarifying the true relationship between the victim and the perpetrator. The individual arrested at the scene was a man of average build, about 31 years old, with a pale face and vacant eyes. Initially, during preliminary questioning, he refused to cooperate and provide detailed information, only continuously mumbling in a trembling voice that he deeply regretted doing something insane and unforgivable. However, when police conducted a quick check of the suspect's personal documents and ID, they were shocked to discover that this person had actually been a former colleague who worked at the same organization as the victim. As soon as the name was announced, Seoul Metro employees present at the scene immediately recognized him with shocked and disbelieving expressions. It was Ju-hwan, a name that was no longer unfamiliar, someone who had been hired by Seoul Metro in the same recruitment round as the victim years earlier, but had subsequently been terminated and dismissed by the company at the end of 2021 for reasons related to workplace discipline. The real reason behind the disciplinary action was quickly clarified by investigators. Ju-hwan had been suspended by the company for being directly involved in a criminal case, in which victim A was the person who had reported his wrongdoing. This crucial and surprising clue immediately changed the entire direction of the case investigation. It was now clear this was not a random or impulsive attack, but rather the suspect had planned to stalk and ambush the victim over an extended period with malicious intent. Records archived at the local police station showed that victim A had repeatedly reported to authorities in the past about being systematically harassed, threatened, and bothered by Ju-hwan. The most recent and serious report involved her formally accusing him of specific charges, including illegal stalking and unauthorized filming of private life, and notably, this legal case was currently pending court sentencing on September 15, 2022, exactly 1 day after the victim was brutally murdered. This shocking discovery immediately transformed the nature and severity of the Sindang Station case, turning it from what appeared to be an ordinary murder into a carefully calculated and sensational revenge killing. The perpetrator had brutally attacked the victim as an extreme and cruel act of retaliation because she had reported his despicable behavior to the law. Regarding the victim, 28-year-old A was the youngest daughter in an ordinary working-class family in Seoul. From family to friends to colleagues, everyone described her as an extremely kind, hardworking, and good-hearted person, always ready to help anyone in need of support. In 2018, A was fortunate to be accepted by Seoul Metro, becoming a subway station operations employee. This was exactly the dream job she had always hoped for and cherished. During the training course for newly recruited employees, A became acquainted with many colleagues hired at the same time, including Ju-hwan, a man with an ordinary appearance, a few years older than her. None of them could have suspected that this seemingly normal colleague relationship would be the seed and beginning of the heartbreaking tragedy that would unfold in the years to come. Friends shared that A loved her job at the station. She often volunteered for evening or night shifts with the simple thought that since she was young, she could take on the difficult work in place of colleagues who had families. In the eyes of her co-workers, A was an employee with a careful nature and high sense of responsibility. It was precisely this character that motivated her to boldly report Ju-hwan when she discovered his wrongdoing, even knowing she might face danger. It's known that from late 2019, Ju-hwan began showing abnormal signs of stalking and harassing A. He repeatedly called and texted asking for dates, but she firmly refused. Not giving up, Ju-hwan switched to psychological terrorism by sending hundreds of messages, even sometimes transferring small amounts of just one to her account, with notes saying, "I miss you," to harass her. Things became tense when Ju-hwan secretly recorded a private video of A and threatened to post it online if she refused to meet him. Terrified, A reported to police in February 2021, hoping the law would protect her. Unfortunately, the legal system at that time wasn't strong enough to fully protect her. herself was unmarried and lived with her mother, having a very close relationship with her. However, there had been a period of misunderstanding and estrangement between A and her father. Heartbreakingly, just a few days before the incident, A had proactively texted an apology and reconciled with her father after a year of not speaking. The message was sent just 3 days before she was killed, and it became the last words she sent to her father. Family members tearfully recounted that A had planned to visit family that weekend, but cruel fate took away that opportunity. Immediately after the incident occurred, a special investigation team from Seoul Police was established, determined to clarify every hidden aspect of the case. Initially, with the perpetrator caught red-handed and clear revenge motive, many would think this was an easy case. However, the deeper they dug, the more investigators discovered a chain of serious mistakes by authorities that had created conditions for the crime to occur. According to forensic examination results, experts confirmed the victim suffered a total of 12 stab wounds. Fatal injuries concentrated in the chest and abdomen areas, showing the killer intended to take the young woman's life as quickly as possible. The estimated time of death was about 30 minutes after the victim was attacked. The fact that she was able to press the alarm bell in time and was rushed to emergency care helped narrow down the time frame of the incident. This detail also matched witness statements when they heard the bell ring around 8:55 p.m. When examining the blood-stained knife, police found fingerprints and DNA matching Ju-hwan, irrefutable evidence of guilt he couldn't deny. Additionally, the hood and gloves recovered at the scene also contained Ju-hwan's DNA, showing he had prepared a disguise and tried to avoid leaving traces. Investigators continued examining Ju-hwan's belongings and discovered his phone contained a GPS location spoofing application that had just been installed. Clearly, the attack had been calculated in advance. Furthermore, police discovered hundreds of messages and emails that Ju-hwan had sent to the victim, with content ranging from pleading to threatening. Notably, right after the August 18, 2022 court hearing when prosecutors recommended a 9-year sentence, Ju-hwan still sent messages blaming A for deliberately ruining his life and demanding she settle the matter. When A didn't respond, he continued texting claiming he would meet any demands if the victim would withdraw the lawsuit. From these messages, investigators realized that perhaps from after August 18th, when he realized the recommended sentence was too high and the victim wouldn't reconcile, Ju-hwan had conceived the intention to kill. Ju-hwan's later confession also confirmed this theory. He admitted the thought of committing the crime had flashed through his mind when he heard the court recommend 9 years in prison. This meant the murder had been brewing for nearly a month before it occurred. However, Ju-hwan had been fired and dismissed by the company since the end of 2021, so how could he know the exact, detailed work schedule of the victim to be able to strike precisely during her shift in such a calculated manner? The answer to this mystery was gradually revealed when the investigation team conducted a thorough examination of Seoul Metro's internal network system access history. The data obtained shocked everyone by showing that Ju-hwan still retained internal access credentials that could penetrate the personnel information system and had exploited the security vulnerability to log in illegally multiple times before the incident occurred. Specifically, and more alarmingly, from August 2022, he had made at least 4 illegal accesses to the company's computer system, including on August 18, September 3rd, and particularly seriously, 2 separate times on September 14 itself, the day the incident occurred, with the sole purpose of looking up sensitive personal information, including home address and specific work schedule of the victim. But ironically, the information stored on the company's internal system hadn't been updated in time regarding A's move to a new residence. Therefore, Ju-hwan could only obtain information about her old address. However, not being discouraged or abandoning his evil intentions, he still persistently pursued this incorrect lead with frightening stubbornness. The modern security camera system installed throughout the area of A's old home clearly recorded haunting images of Ju-hwan continuously lurking and stalking around that area up to 5 times on specific dates: September 3rd, 5th, 9th, and especially twice on the morning of September 14th, but naturally couldn't find her since A no longer lived there. Even in his madness and recklessness, Ju-hwan didn't hesitate to illegally break into that apartment building, even climbing the stairs to the exact floor where A used to live and patiently sitting and waiting outside the old apartment door for hours in vain. On the afternoon of September 14th, Ju-hwan again came to lurk at the old address one more time. That was around 5 p.m., and when he didn't see A, he decided to redirect toward the victim's workplace. He knew for certain that A would be working the night shift at Sindang Station that evening, thanks to the shift schedule information on the internal network he had secretly accessed. So around 6 p.m., he moved to Sindang Station. Here, security cameras recorded a man wearing a black hat, face mask, and carrying a backpack standing around the women's restroom area on Line 2 platform level. He patiently waited for over an hour, occasionally checking his watch and glancing inside as if waiting for prey. He had prepared a knife in his backpack, wore a hood and gloves to avoid identification, and to create false alibi evidence by misleading location tracking, Ju-hwan had pre-installed a GPS location spoofing application on his phone. Every detail showed Ju-hwan's plan was extremely sophisticated, calculated weeks in advance. According to witnesses at Sindang Station, that evening victim A was alone performing routine station patrol duties. She went to inspect each area, including the women's restroom. A cleaning lady working at the same time said that around 8:50 p.m., she saw A enter the women's restroom area at the end of the Line 2 corridor, and just a few minutes later the alarm bell rang. No one directly witnessed Ju-hwan's attack, but the brief screams echoing from the restroom were enough to indicate the brutal nature of the assault. Although Ju-hwan had expressed remorse before news cameras, that attitude couldn't hide the horrifying truth that he had never shown repentance throughout the period of pursuing his revenge plan. When conducting in-depth analysis of Ju-hwan's behavior and personality, the police investigation team and criminal psychology experts concluded that Ju-hwan clearly displayed characteristic signs of a pathological obsessive with uncontrollable compulsive tendencies and severe delusional grandiosity. He always harbored the distorted belief that he had full power and authority to do anything to the victim according to his subjective desires, and when firmly rejected, he quickly turned to deep hatred, viewing her as the direct source that destroyed and ruined his future completely. Additionally, throughout the meticulous investigation process to clarify every hidden aspect of the case, an extremely painful and concerning truth gradually emerged before the public eye. Clearly, the authorities responsible for protecting citizens had many precious opportunities and crucial moments when they could have stopped Ju-hwan in time before he had enough time and conditions to carry out the brutal act, but all of these golden opportunities were regrettably missed. Detailed records archived at law enforcement agencies showed that in October 2021, when A first reported Ju-hwan for serious acts, including illegal filming of private life and continuous psychological threats, police quickly arrested Ju-hwan and requested the court to approve a detention order to protect the victim's safety. However, what was regrettable and controversial was that the West Seoul District Court at that time completely rejected this detention request with the reasoning that the defendant had a stable and clear residence, and there were no clear signs showing risk of flight or deliberately destroying evidence. As a result, Ju-hwan was released immediately after just a few days of brief detention. Particularly noteworthy is that at that time, the presiding judge seemed to have been persuaded by Ju-hwan's circumstances and personal background, especially just because he had educational credentials, so the court subjectively trusted that Ju-hwan had sufficient awareness and qualifications to comply with the law and would not be likely to reoffend in the future. This subjective and incautious decision is now being severely criticized by public opinion and experts, because reality showed that after escaping temporary detention, Ju-hwan not only didn't repent, but became even more brazen and ultimately committed this unforgivable, heinous crime. Although victim A had been equipped with modern emergency alert devices by police and received strict temporary protection for a tense first month after the initial report, when the situation seemed to have temporarily stabilized and there were no more clear signs of danger, she decided to decline the police's proposal to extend the protection period, perhaps because she wanted to return to normal life and didn't want to live in constant worry. However, no one could have suspected that Ju-hwan was still secretly continuing harassment in more subtle ways, making it impossible for the victim to detect immediately. By January 2022, the situation escalated seriously again when A was forced to file a second report after continuously receiving increasingly harsh and frightening threatening messages from him. In this second report, Ju-hwan was formally charged with stalking and harassment under newly enacted laws aimed at strengthening protection for victims. But what shocked and bewildered everyone was that in this serious second report, police completely failed to request or demand a detention order for Ju-hwan as they had done before. Instead, they simply sent the case file to the prosecutor's office for review, and Ju-hwan was allowed to remain completely free during the long wait for trial. This was an extremely dangerous legal loophole, because for the next 8 months before committing the horrific crime, Ju-hwan was completely free to move around and had ample time to plan revenge meticulously and in detail. Legal and security experts later harshly assessed that authorities had let too many important golden opportunities slip through their hands to stop the crime in time before it occurred. When asked to explain these controversial decisions, police reasoned that at the time they were only strictly following current legal regulations, which set strict requirements that there must be specific and clear signs showing the suspect had a high likelihood of re-offending before detention measures could be implemented. Ironically and painfully, those dangerous signs could only be convincingly proven through the very brutal and horrific act that Ju-hwan ultimately committed. With all the evidence collected, the case file was quickly completed. The Seoul Central Prosecutor's Office decided to prosecute Jeon Ju-hwan on a series of serious charges. According to the case file, perpetrator Jeon Ju-hwan, born in 1991, is South Korean. Ju-hwan's background wasn't particularly special. His parents had divorced, and he lived mainly with his mother. Ju-hwan had a college education and had once taken the CPA accountant certification exam. In 2018, he passed the Seoul Metro entrance exam and met victim A when they both went through new employee training together. On the surface, Ju-hwan showed no abnormal signs. He even appeared quiet and sometimes awkward in communication. However, internally, this person harbored many psychological problems. Regarding Ju-hwan's prior criminal history, besides harassing victim A, he had never been convicted of criminal charges before 2022. But the fact that he stalked A for 3 years showed his dangerous nature. According to records, from late 2019, Ju-hwan had become obsessed with A. Initially, it may have been one-sided affection, but when rejected, the twisted infatuation quickly turned into possession and hatred. Ju-hwan secretly photographed and filmed A, then used those images as tools to force her to reciprocate his feelings. He repeatedly violated no-contact orders, showing no fear even when investigated by police for the first time in 2021. Ju-hwan's continued threatening messages to A in early 2022, despite being fired by the company, showed his frightening recklessness and stubbornness. According to assessments from psychology experts, Ju-hwan had an extremely selfish personality, always blaming others instead of taking responsibility. When reported, instead of feeling remorse, he believed that A had ruined his future. This distorted thinking led Ju-hwan to nurture cruel revenge intentions later. The criminal process also showed Ju-hwan had systematic preparation, from preparing weapons and disguise equipment to choosing timing and even intentions to flee after committing the crime, all painting the portrait of a cunning, stubborn, and extremely dangerous killer to the community. After collecting sufficient evidence and testimony, the case was quickly brought to trial, attracting enormous public attention. The first instance trial took place at Seoul Central District Court in early 2023. The prosecution charged Ju-hwan with premeditated murder with revenge characteristics and requested the death penalty for the defendant. The prosecutor argued that Ju-hwan's actions showed cruelty and careful calculation. The defendant had no possibility of rehabilitation, and allowing him to live could threaten the lives of others in the future. Additionally, the defendant was also tried for charges of stalking and illegal privacy filming, where the stalking charge alone had already received a 9-year prison sentence. At the trial, the victim's family attended in utter grief. The victim's mother collapsed in tears upon seeing the person who had taken her daughter's life, while her father sat silently clutching his daughter's portrait. At this point, Ju-hwan stood before the court with his head bowed. When hearing the prosecutor describe his crimes in detail, his face turned pale, and when his lawyer mentioned his mother, Ju-hwan broke into tears. But no one in the courtroom felt sympathy. Many believed Ju-hwan's tears were only to reduce his sentence. In February 2023, the trial court sentenced Ju-hwan for serious revenge murder, sentencing him to 45 years in prison. Additionally, the court required the defendant to wear electronic monitoring ankle bracelet for 15 years after completing his sentence and to participate in psychological education courses about assault and stalking harassment. This sentence was lighter than the requested death penalty because the court had considered some factors such as Ju-hwan admitting guilt and showing some remorse, and that he was still young with no prior convictions, giving him a chance for rehabilitation in his later years. However, when announced, the 45-year sentence immediately caused much controversy. The victim's family burst into angry tears, believing this sentence was too light and not proportionate to the crime. The public everywhere also expressed extreme outrage. Polls showed the majority of people supported the court imposing the death penalty in this case, or at least life imprisonment without parole. A wave of criticism that the justice system was too soft on violent criminals began spreading on South Korean social media. This public pressure somewhat prompted the prosecutor's office to file an appeal, demanding harsher punishment. Defendant Ju-hwan's side also appealed, but for the opposite reason. His lawyer argued that 45 years was too harsh compared to average sentences for single murders, and the court hadn't fully considered mitigating circumstances. Finally, in July 2023, the appellate court issued a ruling increasing the sentence to life imprisonment for Ju-hwan. This life sentence meant Ju-hwan would remain in prison for life unless granted special clemency, something very rare in South Korean law. The appellate court emphasized the extreme pain and horror the victim had to endure, as well as the irreplaceable loss to her family. Therefore, life imprisonment was appropriate. Additional punishments such as 15 years of electronic monitoring and rehabilitation education remained unchanged. Upon hearing the verdict, Ju-hwan collapsed. He trembled, understanding that the door to freedom had closed forever. Ju-hwan's lawyer subsequently continued appealing to the Supreme Court with slim hopes of sentence reduction. They argued that life imprisonment was too harsh compared to precedents. But in October 2023, the South Korean Supreme Court rejected the appeal and upheld the life sentence for Ju-hwan. The Supreme Court judicial panel affirmed they could not show leniency when the defendant had deliberately taken another person's life to obstruct justice, an act that challenged the rule of law and required stern punishment. The case at Sindang Station was classified as particularly serious, requiring close attention from public opinion nationwide. A's passing became a painful wake-up call about gaps in the women's protection system, forcing South Korean society to reconsider and change. After the incident, the South Korean government amended anti-stalking harassment laws, increasing penalties and giving police more authority to intervene earlier, while also applying electronic monitoring measures to high-risk individuals. So, what do you think? Is the life sentence sufficient deterrent, or are stronger punishments needed for dangerous criminals like Ju-hwan? Please share your views in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.